Good evening, Fathers. Let us first listen to this reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Thessalonians. First letter, chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. You yourselves know, brothers and sisters, that our coming to you was not in vain. But though we had already suffered and been shamefully maltreated at Philippi, as you know, we had courage in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in spite of great opposition. For our appeal does not spring from deceit or impure motives or trickery, but just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the message of the gospel, even so we speak, not to please mortals, but to please God who tests our hearts. As you know, and as God is our witness, we never came with words of flattery or with a pretext for greed, nor did we speak praise from mortals, whether from you or from others, though we might have made demands as apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, like a nurse tenderly caring for her own children. So deeply do we care for you that we are determined to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you have become very dear to us. You remember our labor and toil, brothers and sisters. We worked night and day so that we might not burden any of you while we proclaim to you the gospel of God. You are witnesses, and God also, how pure, upright, and blameless our conduct was towards you believers. As you know, we dealt with each of you like a father with his children, urging and encouraging you, and pleading that you should lead a life worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. My dear fathers, soon after we left for Christmas holidays, the Holy Father, Pope Francis, was addressing the Roman Curia on the eve of Christmas. In the introduction, I found some interesting points for our reflection and also for our theme of today. The Holy Father quotes St. Augustine, who commented on the Christmas feast, saying, "Immense in the form of God, tiny in the form of slave, magnus in forma Dei, brevis in forma servi." And another quote is from the disciple of St. Anthony the Hermit, whose feast we celebrated yesterday, Saint Macarius, who uses the Greek verb smikrino, to become small. Listen attentively. The infinite, unapproachable, and uncreated God, in his immense and ineffable goodness, has taken a body, and I dare say, infinitely diminished his glory. The Holy Father spoke of Christmas as the feast of the loving humility of God. He asks us to say yes to the humble lover, not merely to the master of the universe. He quotes also Pope Paul VI, who in his message in 1971 said, "Why, God did not come in splendor and power. He didn't want to instill fear that we may rub our eyes in amazement. He came the smallest, the frailest, the weakest. The reason is this: no one should be afraid to approach him. All would feel close to him, draw near to him." That's why Jesus came as a baby. In this context, we can also remember what St. Teresa of Child Jesus said, "I cannot fear a God who made himself so little for me. I love him. Indeed, he is nothing but love and mercy." Speaking of the reform of the Curia, the Pope said, what matters is not merely change of persons that may happen always, but it is the conversion in persons, continuing conversion and purification, a change of mentality. Maybe we can apply this to our own context in the seminary and institute. A continuing conversion and purification. We need to be aware of our sickness. There must be a personal and collective decision to be cured by patiently and perseveringly accepting the remedy. Today, I invite you to make an act of self-criticism to verify if in the depths of the heart our conduct is congruent with the office that is entrusted to us. I took the passage from St. Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians, second chapter, where he reviews his relationship with the Thessalonians. On the basis of this text, let us also review our relationship with other members of the staff, our other collaborators, domestic workers, and especially the students. When we listen to one side of a telephonic conversation, sometimes we can infer what the person from the other side is talking also. Paul defends himself against his accusers. We can infer their accusations. Most likely they spoke about Paul that he is a fraud. He is not true. He is not at all courageous, afraid. Selfishly he preached the gospel for his fame and glory, so on and so forth. People, my dear fathers, may also find fault with us. Maybe sometimes bishops or even students, sometimes too excessively, but we need to examine ourselves. First of all, Paul says that his visit or his mission in Thessalonica was not a waste of time. That is the first thing. My brothers and sisters, our coming to you was not in vain. We need to tell ourselves that our being in the seminary here is not in vain. Maybe sometimes like a mustard seed, the beginnings are very humble, but ultimately we can believe that the fruits will be abundant. And Paul says that his coming was not in vain. And then he says, I came even after being humiliated in Philippi, suffered, arrested unjustly. In spite of that, if I came to you means it was because of the courage from God. To be in the seminary, to be in the pastoral ministry, we need courage. All this is because of God's command, means first of all, he comes from Philippi to Thessalonica because God commands him. Those who instigated people against him did not leave him. He went to Berea, we read in Acts 17th chapter, and then there also they pursued him. And then from there the believers sent him to Athens. So every journey, every undertaking, every mission is because God commanded. And the courage Paul gets is from God. Then, as we have listened to already, what is the motive of his ministry? Paul says, there was no deceit in my ministry. No deceit means I did not want to lead you to wrong path. I spoke the truth. I suffered for the truth. Secondly, he says there was no impure purpose. It is said some of the itinerant preachers during those days even asked for sexual favors from the people to whom they preached. No impure motive as this sort from Paul. And then some of them were making money. Some of them wanted to become proud and arrogant by their preaching. No impure purpose. We need to also examine ourselves. What is the motive of our being here? And then again he says, there was no trickery in my preaching. That means I did not hide any truth. I did not coerce you to believe by tricking. Positively, this can be put like this. We were preaching, my dear brothers and sisters, a message that is true with motives that were pure. with methods that were completely honest. What Paul puts it negatively, I can put it this way: a message that is true, with motives that were pure, with methods that were completely honest, not for money, not for fame, not for popularity. Our teaching, our formation exercises, our accompanying the students, our writing, or whatever it may be, the activity, it should not spring from these motives. Everything, as Paul means it, out of love for Christ and for others. And then Paul says, he speaks, that too in the present, Lalumen, speak, I will continue to speak. He says, I have been tested like a coin, whether to check whether it is genuine. I have been approved by God to do this. By our priestly ordination, by their appointment to the seminary, we can say we have also been tested and given a special task of formation in this house. Another accusation should have been that Paul is a people pleaser. So in verse 4, Paul says, I want only to please God, not to please people. We need to ask ourselves, whom am I really serving? When we say that we are serving the brothers, sometimes there can be conflicting demands and expectations from them. But when you say, I am only serving God and I want to do what God wants me to do, then we may not be in danger. Elsewhere, especially in 1 Corinthians 9th chapter, 19 to 23, Paul speaks of being all things to all. But then, while being at the service of the people, he never diluted the mission that was given to him by God. And then there were some preachers who were simply indulging in flattery. In verse 5, Paul says, I did not indulge in flattery. It is not merely saying nice things. It is cajoling people for selfish motives. Sometimes as teachers in the seminary, we may be tempted to do that too. Cajoling people, flattering people for selfish motives, to be in the good books of others, students and even other members of the staff. He says he did not put on a mask to cover up greed. Another translation, free translation says, I did not pretend to be your friends to make money, to get your money. And then verse 6 says, I did not seek praise from mortals, you or others. Seeking praise can also be another hunger for many people. And then these are about Paul's moral integrity, boldness, courage from God, trying to please only God, not for trickery, not for other favors. A real formator, teacher, pastor, missionary must imitate Paul, I believe, in this kind of moral integrity. And then comes one of the excellent parts of this passage where Paul calls himself a mother who tenderly cares for her children. A gentle mother who tenderly cares for her children. As you know, there were so many images for pastors. One of the famous is, of course, the shepherd, already in the Gospel of St. John and even in the other Gospels. But then in Paul himself, we find other images. Steward, 1 Corinthians 4, 1 to 2. Slave, Colossians 4, 12. Herald or messenger, 1 Timothy 2nd chapter, 7th verse. And then in 2 Timothy 2nd chapter, we have a number of images. Teacher, soldier, athlete, farmer, to describe his mission. But then here, Paul calls himself mother. That too a gentle mother. The mother who makes her baby warm. The mother that sacrifices. The mother who is full of intimate affection, sacrificial love, unselfish labor. And then he calls himself gentle, acceptance, respect, compassion, tolerance of imperfections, patience, tenderheartedness, loyalty. All these qualities can be summarized in this word gentle. How gentle we are with other members of the staff and the students. If we want to imitate Paul, imitate Jesus, who was meek and humble of heart. Elsewhere in Galatians 4th chapter 19th, we have heard how Paul speaks of his suffering as the suffering of the mother in labor to bring forth Christ in his believers. And here Paul speaks of his love. And then he goes on to say, like a mother, I want to share the gospel. Usually we use the word proclaim the gospel. Mother doesn't proclaim, mother only shares. And he says not only the gospel, but also the whole life. Gospel is the divine bread, gift of God. He is ready even to share his soul. In Philippians 2nd chapter 17th verse we read, he is ready to give even his life for his believers. Commenting on this, Cardinal Albert Vanwa, former rector of Biblicum, in 2008 he brought out a book in Italian, Pietro e Paolo. In that he says, there is an official part in each of our ministry, and then there is also a personal part. We are most of the time very official, doing our work, writing accounts, or preparing for classes, writing books, or whatever it may be, doing some administrative duties. And then there is a personal part, affectivity, but with a few persons, usually a few friends in the family context between mother and children. But we don't show off this personal part, our lighter side, to more persons, then intensity reduces. How is it possible to be friendly with 100 persons? But something unique about Paul, he is exceptional. He is so loving and gentle to the whole community, though maybe a community of 150 or 200, transcends all kinds of affective egoism, loves with all his heart his community. St. John Chrysostom, commenting on this passage, says on friendship, what a marvel is friendship. So great, none can understand, no discourse can explain, unless you experience yourself. Better the sun is put off than to be deprived of friendship. Better to live in darkness than to be without friendship, he says. So the attitude of Paul towards his believers, being like a mother, caring for them, being concerned about them, is really marvelous. It is worthy for our imitation. Then Paul speaks about his hard work in verse 9. I did not want to burden any of you. I worked night and day. He did not want to burden the new believers. Again, it's time that we make an examination of conscience, how much we give to God. And speaking about his conduct, he uses three words, hosios, dikaios, and amemtos, holy, upright, blameless. He says, I was pure, I was honest, I was faultless. Pure in that I am set apart for a particular service. Upright, obedience to God's law. Blameless in my conduct towards you. While teaching, while forming students, do not live carelessly. Teach with words, but more with your lives, Paul seems to say. And he tells the people, you are my witness and God also is my witness. A person who is leading his believers to God by his excellent conduct. We heard about mother in the earlier verse. Now, verse 10 onwards, we hear about Paul being father. Mother is for caring and for sacrificial love. The father is worried about educative preoccupation. Again here, Paul says, I encouraged you. What is encouraging? Come alongside the people, the students, with helpful instruction and insight. Secondly, he says, I comforted you. Come alongside the students with sympathy and concern. And then I urged you like a father. Correct the students, rebuke them if necessary, but also gently, like assisting a tender plant to stand straight. The fatherly attitude of Paul. kind but not compromising with regard to the gospel. And then all this for what? That people may lead a life worthy of God. This is what St. Paul invites us to do. The first part on moral integrity in doing what we are supposed to do. And the second part with apostolic charity, holy, upright, blameless, being like a mother and father to the students, to the other companions. May we be inspired by this testimony of Paul, who invites us to imitate him as he imitates Christ. Amen.